So we just came out of the flood, and now we're going to populate the world. So let's see what happens. Last week, this is where we left it in Genesis 9, verse 18. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, Japheth. Go back. Shem, Ham, Japheth. I didn't read it fast. And Ham was the father of Canaan. And these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. So from these three sons, that's how we're going to move forward this week and find out how they did that. But first we have to talk about a backstory. A backstory is what we talk about when we start a major story, but we got to find out what's behind it. And it's a very unusual backstory. And this is how we start off in chapter 9, verse 20. This is the new today. So they get off the boat, and Noah began farming and planting a vineyard. So we're a couple seasons after the flood here. We've got a good vineyard going. We've got some grapes. And, of course, everyone knows if you take grapes and you crush them and stick them in a warm place, they ferment and they turn into wine, which might have been a new thing for Noah, because what happened is he drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself in his tent. What's that mean? Well, what that means is that he sort of lost his judgment is what it was, and he went in his tent and basically kind of, I got to lay down for a while, and everything flopped open, and he's semi-naked in the tent. That's a bad deal, because what happens next is not great. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his two brothers outside. The two brothers, but Shem and Japheth, took a garment, laid it upon both their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. So this shame of Noah being just totally zonked out and with wine and uncovered. Well, the youngest son, Ham, he sees this. Some commentators have said, well, seeing his father's nakedness means he did bad things. Well, not necessarily, because he goes out and tells his brothers. So that's probably not it. But there is a certain amount of dishonor and disrespect and impropriety in how Ham hung out in the tent and looked at Dad. That's all we can say about it. It's like right on the edge of sexual weirdness, and it does actually cross over the line. It's wrong what he did. So his older brothers decide, we need to cover up Dad, but we don't want to look at him. So they put, you see, kind of like a blanket. They put this between them, a garment between the two of them. And they enter the tent backwards so they can't see Dad. And they carry this thing backwards like this until they finally drop it over Dad. So they don't dishonor him by looking at his exposure, but they do cover him up. Good move by Japheth and his brother Shem. But Ham did wrong in not doing some way of trying to fix that. And again, the wrong, it's rather vague at this point. It's borderline sexual, but not quite. But it's still very, very inappropriate what he did. And he says another thing right here. He says that Ham, the father of Canaan. Now, we're going to see Canaan's name come up an awful lot today. There's something about Canaan. And so for the reader, the Israeli reader especially, they see Canaan and go, oh, Canaan? Oh, and we're going to try and see if we can recreate that effect. But Canaan is a bad name in the entire Old Testament. So anyway, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father. Well, Noah woke from his wine, and he knew what his youngest son had done to him, his youngest son being Ham. Don't forget that. And so he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers. Canaan, who's Ham's son. So even though Ham's the one that did the wrong thing, Noah curses his son. Wait a second, is that fair? Well, this whole point right here has been debate of biblical scholars for eons. And probably the best way to resolve this is what I read. It turns out that anytime someone in the Old Testament, in ancient cultures, does something right, his dad gets credit. Anytime he does something wrong, his dad is shamed. It's always about that. For instance, if you go to David and Goliath, remember David and Goliath? David goes out there, and he dies, cut his head off, right? The first thing, that was my short form version, it only takes 2 seconds. The first thing that happens is Saul, the king, says, who is that boy's father? Remember that? That's so he could praise his father. That's what it's all about. So really David's credit goes to his father, not to David himself. That also happens with shame. So that's actually the ancient culture. So what Noah's doing right here is he's saying, what I'm going to do is visit this curse, but if I visit the curse on Ham, it looks bad for me. Now, it's not a selfish thing he's doing, but what he's saying is that that's not the problem. It's not because I raised you wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the blame on your son so that Ham's inherited failure will go through all his children. That's what he's trying to get at. So I'm going to curse your son Canaan. Now, it turns out it's a very important point here is that Canaan ends up being probably the worst bad guy in the entire Old Testament. So this is sort of in keeping with what they know about Canaan's future. How do we know what Ham did? That's a very good question. Don't know. Yeah. How does Noah know? Oh, probably he woke up covered. Said, oh, whoops, was I uncovered? Well, wait a second, who covered me? And probably Japheth and Shem said, we did. And said, well, what about Ham? Well, he's the one that came in and saw you like that. And so I'm sure the boys talked it up. That's my guess. That's my speculation. That's all we know. Okay. So he goes on, actually, Noah goes on and says, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And may God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So something about the future of Canaan and his descendants is that he and his descendants will be one serving the older brothers. That's what it is. And he also says, the God of Shem, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Something about Shem, as we look forward, will be godly. This Shem somehow will always be right with God, because he says the God of Shem, which is interesting. So Noah's giving us some clues that we're going to look at in just a second about what happens to the three boys. Something about Shem, he's going to stay in some godly sense, and he is going to be served by Canaan and all his kids. So there's going to be this relationship between the two of them. And then Japheth, may God enlarge Japheth. That doesn't mean eating too much. Brr. It means the fact that Japheth, when he spreads across the earth, is probably going to spread farther than the other two sons. He's just going to take off. And by the way, to give you a clue, Japheth largely is connected to Indo-European people, us. So very much Western Europe, spread out all over the entire world. So they may be actually prefiguring some of this, the fact that he's just going to increase. And you'll see the contrast in just a second to Shem and the other guys. And again, he says another strange thing. Let him dwell in the tents of Shem. What? Well, we'll talk about this a little bit later. But it could very well hint at the fact that Shem, the spiritual son who's going to be connected to God, and through whom, by the way, the rescue is going to come, through Shem. It could very well be because of that godly lineage through Shem. How is it that Japheth, who's going to spread out all over the world and be the goyim, the nations, how is he going to garner any kind of the same hospitality and connectedness to God that Shem's going to have? If through the rescuer we are grafted in. So these are kind of prefigures to the fact that the nations will find a rescue through Jesus, and this Jesus will come through Shem. Kind of what he's getting at. And Canaan, I don't know. It looks pretty bad for Canaan. He's just going to be everyone's servant. So let's see if we can talk more about where they're going. But Noah's telling us what's going to happen. So Noah lived 350 years after the flood. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. And so the algebra question of the day is how old was Noah when the flood came? 600. Yeah. If a train leaves Chicago at 3 in the afternoon. Yeah. So that's what it is. So Noah's 600. He lives another 350 years. He ends up dying at 950. Old guy. Really old guy. Really old guy. But keep this in mind, that after his three sons, spread out and start multiplying and having kids, and their kids are having kids, and their kids are having kids, and their kids are having kids, and they're telling stories about the flood, you can go to great-great-great-great-grandfather Uncle Noah for 350 years, and he can tell you the first-hand account. You can go to his sons, and they'll tell you the first-hand account. So the beginning of this populating of the world after the flood, these guys lived long enough, they could be first-hand testimonies and witnesses to exactly what happened. This is why, and we talked about this last week, this is why so many of the distributed cultures in the world still have very active flood accounts in their ancestry. In fact, the one that comes out of Babylonia, I was reading that one specifically, the one that comes out of the Babylonian region is very, very close to the Hebrew account. There's 3 sons that survive it, that populate the world, and they float in a boat. I mean, it's very similar. And they're not getting this from the Bible. They're getting this from handed-down oral histories. How did they get that? Well, Noah was alive for 350 years. He could have said, hey, kids, carry on the fire. Let me tell you one of the incredible stories of the entire world. We floated in a boat for a long time. So it was common knowledge. So he dies, and now that's the end of the backstory about how Canaan is in bad ways, and the other two guys look like they're in good ways. And so let's see if we can track them. So this is where we start in chapter 10. Now these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and sons were born to them after the flood. Well, like how? Well, like, here's how. So he's going to go through, and he's going to tell us the entire list of nations that come out of Noah's sons. What? Yeah, this is cool. So here we go. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tyrus. And these are the easy names, so kind of buckle your seats so it gets crazy after this. Those are the sons of Japheth. Now the sons of Gomer, we're going to talk about Gomer's sons, were Ashkenaz, Riphath, Togarmah, and the sons of Javan were Elisha, and Tarshish, and Kittim, and Dodanim. Anytime you see the im at the end, say im, Dodanim. So that's what that is. That's Javan's sons. And then he's going to go on. And from these, the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. So these guys are all going to spread out, the sons of Japheth, and they're going to, like I said before, and we'll see in a second where they go, but they're going to spread out and be nations themselves. We'll come back to these guys. He goes on in verse 6. Now the sons of Ham were Cush and Mizraim, get that? And Put and Canaan. I'm going to leave Canaan orange because he's got a bad name in essence. So there's Ham's 4 kids right there. And to elaborate a little bit, the sons of Cush on the far left there were Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Ramah and Sabtika. And the sons of Ramah, just so we can go to the next generation, were Sheba and Dedan. Okay? Now Cush also became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Heard the name of Nimrod before? As an aircraft, exactly. Yeah, well, if you think about it, this is really pretty remarkable. Nimrod's name is actually part of the common knowledge of mankind these days. Isn't that bizarre? But he was, at the time, some incredible hunter. In fact, his name is connected to the word that means hunting. He was some incredible hunter. In fact, to spook you out a little bit, this word hunter, when it's used in other places in the Bible, and I looked at it, means almost equally hunting animals as well as hunting men. So Nimrod has a fearsome kind of reputation as being a hunter of all hunters. And not only that, he also planted some civilizations. He's going to stop and tell us right here. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Yeah, the Tower of. That's the beginning of his kingdom. And Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. You know where Shinar is? Shinar is the Hebrew word for the Babylonian area. So it's the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. That's Shinar, is Babylonia. So he was somewhere over in that valley. And from that land, he went forth into Assyria. That's up to the north. It's almost exactly present-day Syria, where there's so much problem going on. And he built Nineveh. Heard of that? Yeah, that's where Jonah was sent, but Jonah went in the whale instead and eventually got there. Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. So to some of the Hebrew readers, they would read this and go, I know all those places. You know, for us, if it's not Philadelphia or Salt Lake City, we're not sure where it is. But these are very famous places, up and down the Tigris-Euphrates Rivers Valley. And it seemed as though their prevalence in the history seems to come from Nimrod, this mighty, mighty hunter, potentially of men. So Nimrod's just an incredible background figure in all of history. And so he wanted to stop with his genealogy and just remind us of that right here. Okay, so now he's going to go on. Mizraim became the father of, say it with me, Ludim. Oh, excellent, Ludim. And Anamim, yeah, and Luhabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusim, and Kazluhim. Are you getting this? From which the Philistines came. Oh, okay. And Caphtorim. So when that Hebrew lesson, when you see an im at the end, that just means plural. I always say guys. So when you see the Ludim, it's the guys of Lud, is all it is. It's all the people. It's the plural. Yeah. So Em is always the plural ending. So here, actually, he starts to depart a little bit from the fact that we're not just getting single names of these descendants. We're getting the names and their whole families after it. That's why he's adding Em to it. So he's not just talking about the son Lud. He's talking about Lud and all his folks. Ludim, the Ludim. So that's what we're talking about. And the Philistines are in there, which is interesting. We'll talk about them in a second, too. Now, Canaan, he turns his attention to Canaan. Canaan became the father of Zidon and his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite. I like the ites, they're easier to say. And the Hivite, and the Arkite, and the Sinite, and the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. See, I told you they get harder. Yeah, and you know what's interesting? Canaan has the worst name in the entire Old Testament. You would think a guy who's a Jew, who's writing about the inheritance of the people in the New World after the flood, you'd think he wouldn't spend much time on their archenemy. But he's got a lot of there. Now, we've moved from the Ems to the ites. Did you notice that? Em means the plural of that one person. The ites mean a whole nation of people that come from them is what it is. So the ites, for instance, the Jebusites, they're the people of Jebus, but all the people that are there. It's like a nation of them. So now we're talking about not just plural, but actually a nation, the ites. So if someone was going to talk about the people who live in Utah as a nation, you'd call them the Utahites or something like that, instead of just the Utahns. So that's what it is. The ites is a nation that comes out of that. So Canaan's got quite a few. And afterward, the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad. So they really did spread out. We're going to talk about that distribution in just a second. Okay, the territory of the Canaanite extended from Sidon as you go toward Gerar, and as far as Gaza, yes, the same Gaza that's in the news, the Gaza Strip where the Palestinian state is. As you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah, that's Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zeboim as far as Lasha. What? Okay, we need a map. This is a map from several thousand feet in the air. Here's Israel in the orange outline, present-day Israel. And into the north, I have a yellow line around Lebanon. You may not be able to see that too well. Anyway, Sidon is up here on the Lebanon coast to this very day. So they're saying that Canaanites went from Sidon, and as you go toward Gerar, which is toward the south, all the way down to Gaza. Actually, the map says Gaza Strip right there to this very day. And as you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah, which is at the bottom of the Dead Sea, so as you go actually from here across inland to the bottom of the Dead Sea, that's where Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim are there as far as Lasha. So he's telling us, just in case you've forgotten, the Canaanites, these guys right here, seem to have encompassed all the way from what is today middle Libya, all the way down to the bottom of present-day Israel and inland to the Dead Sea. Now, here's our conflict, because pretty soon the people of Israel are going to be put in this spot, but it's full of Canaanites. And we'll talk about that as well. Oh, by the way, too, as I was looking at this on Google Earth, if you see up there on Lebanon, up here, let's see if my thing works. It doesn't really, oh, there it goes, yeah. Lebanon right up here, right there, okay. The Lebanese coast right there, I did a close-up on that. Here's the close-up, and down the yellow line down at the bottom here is the north end of the Israeli border. And as you look up the coast, there's Tyre, which is really well known. And as you continue to go up a little ways here, I don't know if you can see it, but right there it says Sidon. See that? It says Sidon. You can go on Google Earth and find out where Sidon is to this very day. It's crazy. And then Beirut. Beirut is that little thing right up here at the top. That's Beirut. You hear about that all the time in Lebanon. So yeah, I'm always impressed when I'm doing this stuff. I try and find where these places are. Just as a hunch, I'll just type the name of the place into Google Earth, and it's still called that. Thousands and thousands of years later, it's still called that. Okay, we'll come back to this in just a second, but that's the territory. Now, these are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, and by their lands, and by their nations. That's the ites, nations. So that's where Ham is. And we'll talk more about where they spread out to in just a second. Let me take a detour and talk about Canaan for a second. What is the deal with Canaan? Why is Canaan such a bad person? Well, we've got the first thing. Number one is that they're going to be inhabiting the land when Israel comes to move in. The nation of Israel will take a detour down to Egypt. Remember when they became slaves in Egypt? They're going to go down to Egypt for a while, but eventually they'll come out of Egypt led by the great man Moses. And Moses, led by God, takes them out of Egypt, takes them through the desert. They wander in the desert for 40 years because a lot of people don't believe they can get in. But after that 40 years, a new generation comes and they move up into this land we just looked at. So for one thing, we have a conflict because the Canaanites are living exactly where God has promised the Israelites they're going to go. That's number one. But number two is something much more ominous. And I wanted to show you this before we pushed on. Let me quote for you from, speaking of the Exodus, from Exodus 23. As they're on the process of moving into that area, God says, "For my angel will go before you," he's saying this to Moses and to the people of Israel, "my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them." 24. "You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces." So why is God being so adamant that when they move into that area, not only do you displace the Canaanites and the Jebusites and all those guys, but actually wipe them out completely? Is God being unfair in that sense? Well, no. What he's saying is it's a religious issue. If you guys go in there and you move in next door to the Canaanites or the Jebusites, they are into the most unspeakably weird religious stuff. And I mean baby sacrifice weird. We're talking nasty stuff. If you move in alongside those people, we're going to have an inevitable contamination. And you don't want to go where these people have gone. These people have already angered God, and God says, when you move in, I'm wiping them out. These people are done. What they believe and what they do is so heinous, I'm just done with them. So when you move in, my angel will go before you and give you all these victories, but you got to make sure you wipe these people out. For religious reasons. That's how dangerous these people are. When you study the ancient religions of these people, of the Canaanites, it'll gross you out really fast. It's the kind of thing that's... Have you ever read the histories, for instance, of some of the Native Americans deep down in Central America? What goes on like 1,000 years ago in the animal sacrifices and the human sacrifices? Take what you know about that and multiply it by 10. And you'll understand what's going on in Canaan right now. God says, I want you to be in their land, but don't live next door to them. I've had it with them. I'm wiping them out through your entry into the land. The Palestinians in Gaza, yeah, we can talk about it in a second, but it's connected. It's really connected, yeah. Let me give you another couple places. Exodus 34, a little bit later, God says, be sure to observe what I'm commanding you this day. Behold, I'm going to go drive out the Amorite before you, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. I'm going to drive them out. And he continues, but watch yourself that you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you're going, or it'll become a snare in your midst. But rather, you are to tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherim, for you shall not worship any other God, for the Lord whose God is jealous, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise, you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods and sacrifice to their gods. And someone might invite you, to eat of his sacrifice, and you might take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. No, you shall make for yourself no molten gods. So really, again, he's being very clear. It's inevitable. You move in next door to Canaanite, life's going to get bad. Not only are you going to reject me and I'm a jealous God, but it's going to get even worse than all that. I mean, not only will you reject me, you'll start creating gods out of precious metals. And, in parts of the Bible, this is called idolatry. And they're actually ridiculed in other parts of the Bible where, they say, hey, can you make your idol move or talk? Look, I'm going to push him over. It doesn't even breathe. But they're going to do this. They're going to actually displace God. And God's saying, I want you to be my people. If you'll be my people, I'll be your God. But if you move in next to the Canaanites, you're going to decay with them. So let's make sure they're just not there. I want to give you their land, but I don't want you to give you the Canaanites as your neighbor. If you think this is bad, it gets worse. Deuteronomy 9. Don't say in your heart that when the Lord your God has driven them out before you, don't say in your heart, well, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. No, but it's because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. So before you start to get this uppity idea that God's wiping them out because you're so great. No, it's because they're so nasty. That's what it is. And there's a hidden warning in this. Maybe none of us are really that great. Maybe all of us have a tendency to slide downward, which is why if you move in next to a Canaanite, the slide will be faster. So before you get all uppity about this, remember, God is doing this because they have gone over the top and they're so wicked. And I don't want you living next to that kind of wickedness. Okay? I think I gave you one more right here. How did it work out for them? Not well. Judges is the first book after they get into the land. Judges 3, verse 5. The sons of Israel, they lived among the Canaanites. They forgot to kill them all. They didn't do a complete job. They lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters for themselves as wives. And they gave their own daughters to their sons. And they served their gods. And the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God. And they served the Baals, and the Asherah. And God could be standing in heaven saying, I told you so. It's going to happen. We are not really any better than the people who influence us. If we were so righteous, that influence wouldn't make any difference. But unfortunately, we're as susceptible as they are to it. And that's where God's saying, don't live next to them. There really is a bigger message when it comes to isolating ourselves from the evil culture that we live in. There's a bigger message about that. And Paul says in the book of Romans, he says, don't be conformed to this world. Don't be conformed to this. Don't let it squeeze you into its mold. Don't be conformed to it, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You need to have another source of input into what's true and false, where life comes from and where life doesn't come from, where the source of decay is and where the source of not decay is. You need to have another input to that. And Paul's making his case that input comes from the Word of God. It's the only way you can keep your head straight about those things. Otherwise, you'll be living up alongside the Canaanites and they'll take you down with them. There's a constant tension between us and the culture, because the culture will say one thing and they'll say, well, this makes perfect sense. And if you stand back, you'll say, well, yeah, that does make perfect sense. But then when God says, no, there's no life in this. You may not be able to see it ahead of time, but there's no life in this. So just trust me. Instead of trying it out and seeing if it works for you, don't try it out. It'll take you the wrong direction. And their decay will pull you with them. Don't be conformed to this world, Paul says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind by what you know. And that book that you hold in your hands is how we know how that works. So that's how it works. Didn't work out well for them. Later on, God will say the presence of the Canaanites in the land of Israel have been proven to be an interesting source of testing for Israel. They'll continue to be that testing forever. That's the Canaanites, the people who were the nasty, nasty potential neighbors of the Israelites, who were not wiped out and who caused endless trouble and testing for Israel. So every time a Jew reads Canaan, they go, even today. Bad Canaan, the son of Ham. And look, he seems to be fulfilling this curse that Noah said to Ham, I'm cursing your son Canaan. And this is it. And not only that, by the time that Israel, the promised people, move into the promised land, he's going to usurp all these Canaanites, and they're going to be utterly wiped out. Potentially, but Israel fails to potentially to wipe them out completely. And that causes problems. The Canaanites. There is no more nasty name in the entire Old Testament for a Jew. Canaan. So you need to shudder when you hear Canaan. Okay, so let's move on. That's the deal with Canaan. We didn't do Shem, the third son. Also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber and the older brother of Japheth, children were born. Now, before I show you the list of the children born, note he says something very interesting. His first summary statement about Shem is that he's what? The father of all the children of Eber. Hold on to that thought, because we're going to see Eber in a second here. The sons of Shem were Elam, and Asher, and Arpachshad. I can do that if I... And Lud, and Aram. That's his sons. Oh, I have a few more details. The sons of Aram, the guy on the right over there, were Uz. I can say that. Uz. And Hol, and Gether, and Mash, just like the TV show. Not. Okay. And then he says, Arpachshad became the father of Shelah. And Shelah, we're going to follow him for a second, became the father of Eber. There's Eber, okay? 2 sons were born to Eber. Peleg was the name of one, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Peleg, in his days, the earth was divided. That's a very intriguing statement. Some people like to look at that and say maybe that's when the continents started to shift apart instead of being one massive continent, and they moved. We know this scientifically, that all the continents were one at one time, and they've drifted apart. Maybe it was during the lifetime of Peleg that they started to do that. Could very well be. A lot of people interpret it that way. Other people interpret this in just a second. You know, the Tower of Babel, God deliberately separated mankind by giving them different languages, and they scattered all over the place, started a whole different cultures. There was a separation right there. Many people think that happened during the days of Peleg because that's when the division happened, and we'll see that in the Tower of Babel. Could be either one of those two, but it's a nice little intriguing tidbit. Peleg. And actually, the word Peleg in Hebrew means divided. So, there's another big clue. Peleg, Joktan. Now, Joktan became the father of Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazarmaveth, and Jerah, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abamael, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. These were the sons of Joktan. I practiced that, Linda. I know, kind of funny. No eames or ites right here, so these are probably the actual names of the descendants in that sense. Those are the sons of Joktan. Now, their settlement extended from Mesha as you go towards Zephar, the hill country of the east. What? Well, again, if you have a Jewish background, you understand what this is. But if you take present-day Israel and you go inland like about to the Rift Valley that goes between the Jordan River, that goes between the Sea of Galilee down the Dead Sea, and you keep going east, it's that area. So it's present-day Jordan is what it is. It's that area right there. So he's giving us some clues about those guys. Now, these are the sons of Shem, according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, according to their nations. So they all turn into those nations. So as he sums it up in 32, these are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations, and out of these nations were separated on the earth after the flood. There's the 3 sons. Now, before we pass on, we do a little geographical interpretation for you. You would win a big prize if you could answer the following question. Who was the oldest, well, not this question. The oldest son of Noah is Shem. And Ham, we know, is the youngest son. So Japheth is kind of in the middle. And yet, in ancient tradition, when you listed the sons of a man, you listed them by order of birth. So what he should be saying is Shem, Japheth, Ham. Shem, Japheth, Ham. Shem, Japheth, Ham. This rule is not violated anywhere in the Old Testament. Shem, Japheth, Ham. So why doesn't it say that? It says this instead of this. And that's the million-dollar question. Why is it always Shem, Ham, and Japheth? I don't know. But it's very odd. And for an ancient reader like the Israelites reading this, they would immediately raise their hand and say, that's not right. You shouldn't say it that way. So why do you say it that way? And, to this day, it's probably one of the most active areas of debate about why it is the order of the names is reversed right here. It's saying something important, but we just don't know what it is anymore. Shem, Ham, Japheth. It just rolls off the tongue. And especially since Ham was the one who kind of did sort of bad things and Canaan was cursed. And it's very odd. I mean, for a couple reasons, Ham should always be last. Not only because he's the youngest, but because he was disfavored. But it's not. It's Shem, Ham, Japheth. You figure that out, I'll give you the big money. No, we don't know. And I don't have an answer for that either. It's just a very odd thing of what's going on. Okay, let me just answer a question of where they are today. Where are these places today? And he gave us a bunch of geographical stuff. Let me go back to Japheth. Here's the family tree of Japheth. If you go to the left there, Ashkenaz is Scythia, which is the area between the Black and the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. And in present-day news, you hear it as Chechnya or the nation of Georgia. Yeah, that's them. By the way, the Scythians, a little bit of historical tidbit, the Scythians were the ones who were very well known for being archers on the horseback of horses. They could go into battle, and while the horses at a full gallop, they could shoot, and they could shoot things accurately as they went by. That's what the Scythians were known for. And they were brutal. So they would send in their first invasion as their first front would come in. They'd have all these guys on horses, and the people that didn't know anything about the Scythians would say, oh, you can't hit anything when you're on a horse. Well, with the Scythians, you can do it just fine. That was the Scythians. They were brutal. They were barbaric in many respects. That was the Scythians. Present-day Georgia and Chechnya. I picked a couple other. Madai right there is the Medes, which is actually, you've heard the Medo-Persian Empire. Persia is present-day Iraq, or Iran, And if you go up to northwest Iran, up in the hill country up there where the Kurds are, Kurdistan and also Azerbaijan, you've heard that one? That's these guys. Up in the northwest section that goes up toward Turkey, that's the Medes that are up there. Another interesting one, this guy, Javan right here, is Ionian. Have you heard of Ionian before? The Ionian is the ancient term for Greece. And to this very day, if you look at the Greek islands, not on the eastern side of Greece, but the islands on the western side of Greece, they're called the Ionian Islands. And the sea that's between the bottom of Greece and the bottom of Italy, right there, is the Ionian Sea. So really, if you just change the letter J into an I, which is what they do in that region, and change the V to an N. I know it sounds kind of clumsy, but there's really no debate about this. Javan is really the old name for Greece. Ionians. About the word Kittim right there in the middle. I didn't write this down in there, but Kittim, even to this very day, if you go to Cyprus, you'll see the word Kittim everywhere. That's an old name for Cyprus, the big island of Cyprus. Tarshish is mentioned several times in the Bible. Jonah, when he gets in a boat, it's headed for Tarshish, which is a metaphoric way of saying the farthest place you can go to in the Mediterranean. It's out of here. Tarshish originally was referred to the coastal regions of the southern part of Turkey, but those people eventually migrated and got in their boats and went as far east as they could go, and they ended up in Spain. Tarshish, Spain. I don't know if I have another. Oh, yeah, Dodanim. In another place, the first D is replaced with an R, so you really have Rodaim. It's the island of Rhodes, which is the easternmost part of the Greek islands right now, almost touching Turkey, is Rhodes. So that's Rhodes. So that whole center section is the Greek people, and the people who kind of were around the Mediterranean, that part, and spread out in the northern part of the Mediterranean. It's fascinating. No one debates this at all. Those are the guys. Let's see, who else should we pick here? Oh, these are good. Cush is Ethiopia. And again, if you go to Ethiopia, they'll call themselves Cushites. To this very day. That's Cush, Ethiopia. By the way, very dark-skinned. If you don't remember where Ethiopia is, it's in Africa. Go to the eastern coast and go south a ways, kind of down to the tip of the bottom of the Red Sea. It's sort of down there. Yeah, it's very dark-skinned. That's Ethiopia. What else do we have here? Oh, Mizraim, Egypt. Again, Mizraim, when you actually look at the Hebrew in the Old Testament, when it talks about Egypt, God brought you out of Egypt, it doesn't use the word Egypt, it uses the word Mizraim. That's the Hebrew word for Egypt. Who else do we have? Put is Libya. Yeah, North Africa up there, the general North Africa coast. And Canaan has been known basically to be Palestine. It's and we saw before, it's actually it's all the way from from Lebanon all the way down through present-day Israel. So, in fact, let me go back for a second. Up here, if you take some of these names up here, I don't think I wrote it down, but a lot of this is Lebanon to this very day. Zidon is actually Sidon. We saw that. You can look on Google Maps, and Sidon's still there. Jebusites, very important in the Bible. When David became king of Israel, the kingdom of Israel was in the capital of Hebron, which is down in the south of Israel. He finally decided, we can't be in Hebron anymore. We need to move north, and we need to take over this little piece of land that juts out, but it's called Jebus, And the people living there are the Jebusites. The Jebusites was the small number of Canaanites who actually lived smack dab in the area that would potentially later be Jerusalem. When you see Jebus in the Old Testament, it's pre-Jerusalem, but it's the area of Jerusalem. If you go up to the Arkites and the Sinites, there's a town in Lebanon called Arka to this very day. That's where the Arkites live. And below them, the Sinites, they lived in a town called Sin. For real. And that's in Lebanon to this very day as well, the Sinites. So those are actually a lot of Lebanon references on the right and a lot of main Israel references on the left. Okay, down here, Nimrod, we said, is in the land of Shinar, which is Babylon, which is really kind of interesting. Let's see, I found a couple. You can spend a lifetime tracking these guys down. It's actually kind of fun. What did I put here? Oh, Elam is Iraq. And to this very day, that word is used in Iraq, Elam. If you go look at, I didn't write this down. I think it's Ezekiel. I forgot where, but there's a curse in Ezekiel against Elam. It's a curse against future day Iraq, which people think has not happened yet. Yeah.
Question. When you said Canaan was Palestine, how much of that is occupied by Israel today?
Almost all of it except the Gaza Strip. Yeah. Exactly. Let's see. Eber is where we get the word Hebrews. That's why he was the father of all the Eber people. Eber is Hebrew. You ever wonder where the name Hebrew comes from? Eber. That's where it comes from right there. But interestingly enough, nowhere on this model do we find where the Hebrews came out of this model. I mean, it's got to be somewhere under Eber, right? Does that mean that Peleg and Joktan are Hebrews? Not exactly, but if you want to follow the line to get to the Hebrews, follow Peleg. And if you go to chapter 11 of Genesis, that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take you through Peleg and get you all the way to Abraham. So this Shem actually occupies all of Syria down through to Arabia. So if anyone asks you in some kind of trivia quiz where the three sons of Noah occupied, the general sense is Ham, the youngest one. You think of North Africa. If you think of the southern coast of the Mediterranean and everything down from there, it includes Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia. It stretches some up into Babylon, kind of curls behind Israel. But basically, it's the southern coast of the of the Mediterranean goes south. That's Ham. If you want to do Shem is pretty much inland between the Mesopotamian Valley and Egypt. If you just draw a line right there, they stayed inland, and they stayed in Shem stayed in a very small area, actually, between right there. It includes most of the Arabs that you think about, Persians in through there. And then when you think of Japheth, right, Japheth who spread out, who was enlarged, he went up and actually did two principal splits. He did most of the northern Mediterranean coast and all up into Europe, and he split also to the east and came down into India, which is why if you've ever heard the term about Indo-European people, that's Japheth. It's in India as well as Europe. That's what it is. And from Europe, the Western civilization went all over the world. So that's the expansion of Japheth. So that's what it is. So Ham, think Africa. Shem, think Middle East. Okay? And then Japheth, think Europe and the world. That's how it works. Okay. Let me bring this to a close. How do you use this? The Canaanites, I want to focus on before we finish. You shall utterly destroy them. It says in Deuteronomy 20. You shall utterly destroy them so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things. And if you stop here, you would say, too bad for the Canaanites. They have been cursed because of what Canaan's father Ham did. They have been the displaced people. They've been the utterly wiped out people. If you want to be somebody, you don't want to be a Canaanite, because they have the worst rep in the entire Bible. But you know what? There's one mention of Canaanites in the New Testament. These nasty, nasty Canaanite people. You should get goosebumps and horrible thinking. They show up in the New Testament. And before we finish this morning, I want to show you that, because that's the message of hope in all of this. Can any good come to a Canaanite? Any good? And if you ask that to a Jew, they'd say, Canaanite. No.
Is that why the Jews hate the Palestine so much?
Bingo. Two different races. Exactly. It goes to this very day. And if you say Canaanite, they're the ones that do detestable things. In fact, the word Canaanite had been given the slang term dogs during the time of Jesus. Dogs. They're dogs. And these are the worst people in the world. Can any good come to a Canaanite? Can any Canaanite ever find any blessing? Is there any place for a Canaanite to be part of the good of God's program? I don't think so. I've read the Old Testament. But you didn't read the New Testament. No? Good try. Watch this. Watch it. This is cool. Matthew 15. Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. I showed you those places, both on the coast of Lebanon. If they're on the coast of Lebanon, that puts them squarely into Canaanite territory. And if you missed that fact, because you didn't take geography in your Hebrew school, and a Canaanite woman from that region, there she is, the only mention in the entire New Testament. And you have to do the shivers with me. And a Canaanite woman. The entirety of the Old Testament is informing you when you read this person does detestable things. And they're to be utterly wiped out and killed. They are not part of the plan of God at all. At all. Canaanite woman. That's how you have to start this story. If you don't know that from the Old Testament, this story doesn't have any sense to you. A Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed." Canaanite woman? No. But he, Jesus, didn't answer a word. That's typical Jewish response to a Canaanite. Like they don't even exist. This is what's expected of him. And if the story ended here, I'd be deeply depressed. It doesn't end here. But his disciples came and implored him, saying, "Hey, send her away. She keeps shouting at us. After all, she's a Canaanite. And she's just shouting at us. She's making our day horrible. Canaanite woman. Shout, Jesus. Just get rid of her." All they're saying to Jesus is, all you have to do is, instead of just ignoring her, tell her to go away. You dog who does despicable, detestable things. Right? Now, that wouldn't be Jesus if he did that. But that's how the very faithful disciples are seeing her. Send her away. She's not part of the plan that you are all about, Jesus. After all, she's a Canaanite woman. And he answered and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Jesus. He's sort of towing the party line. What's he saying? I'm the Messiah. People know I'm the Messiah. Messiah is the king of the Jews. So I'm sent, he's saying, to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he's saying the obvious, what they're all thinking. He's for Israel. She's a Canaanite woman. I'm going to get a headache if I keep doing that. She's a Canaanite woman. She has no way to come into this relationship with Jesus and claim anything, nothing, zero. She does detestable things, and so did all of her ancestors. And Jesus is saying, I'm sent to the Jews. And if the story stopped there, I would be really sad. But it doesn't. Oh. She came and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And here's the crux of the drama. If this woman kneels down in front of Jesus, the king of the Jews, and she's from a Canaanite, despicable, detestable background, will he help her? Can he help her? After all, they were supposed to be totally annihilated when the nation of Israel came into the land. Maybe Jesus is going to annihilate her. But she's kneeling in front of him, and she says two words, "Help me." Can Jesus deny a Canaanite woman? And he answered and said, "It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." That's the slang word for Canaanites. He's still doing the party line thing. If you ever get the visual Bible, I think they did the book of Matthew in the visual Bible, and what they did was they dramatized every scene in the book of Matthew, and they didn't use any words other than what was actually in the text of the Bible. And in this scene, they staged it so well. Jesus has his back to her and is saying these scenes. She's actually knelt down behind him, and he's not even making eye contact with her. I mean, he's basically saying, I'm the king of the Jews. I was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. That's my job. That's my place. That's what I'm supposed to do. And after all, should I take the resources that are supposed to be the children's bread and give it to the dogs? Is that right to take from the children and give it to the dogs? And again, if the story stopped here, I'm not sure I'd be a believer in Jesus. But it doesn't stop here. She says, yes, Lord. I agree. But even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table. I can hardly read this without crying. She said, you're right. I have no reason to presume upon you. You're the king of the Jews. I'm a Canaanite woman. I have no way to say you owe me anything at all because I'm a Canaanite. We were wiped out before your people. We were just summarily destroyed and genocide by God's command against my people. I have no claim to you. I don't want to take the bread away from the children of Israel. But if you drop a few crumbs, isn't that okay for the dogs? And at this point in the visual Bible, Jesus turns around with the biggest grin on his face and just grabs her. Because she's got it exactly right. Exactly right. The Jews don't have favor from the Messiah because they're Jews. Not at all. The only ones who have favor from the Messiah are those who understand who he is and presume upon his grace, not upon their ancestry. And later on, Jesus, and prior to this, John the Baptist, take the Pharisees to account because they were presuming that their ancestry is Jews and not Canaanites. That's what earned them the right for the blessing from the Messiah. And that's totally wrong. It's totally wrong. It's totally, totally wrong. Ancestry has nothing to do with anything. When it comes to the Messiah, Jesus, you come to him and saying, I deserve nothing from you. But if you can drop a few crumbs, I sure would be happy. And he turns, and in his grace, he says, great answer, great answer. Because you can't deserve it, you can't earn it, you can't come from the right ancestry. There's nothing you've done to earn that. I give to you because it's my grace, not because you've earned it or come from the right family. And she got it, right? She did it, right? She got it, right there. She got something that the apostles won't get clicking in their head for a couple more years. Because they're ready to shoo her away. She's a Canaanite woman. She just keeps screaming at us. She's really getting in the way of our great vacation over here on the coast and Tyneside, and I just want to go to the beach for a while, and this woman's bugging us. They just want to send her away. But Jesus speaks truth and truth and truth, and she gets it. She gets it. So Jesus says to her in verse 28 of Matthew 15, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. Her faith was in Greek megos. Same where we get mega from. It's the only person in the entire New Testament that Jesus says your faith is megos. Now he does coincidentally praise a Roman centurion. Says his faith is great. He uses a different word than megos, but the same kind of thing. And with the Roman centurion, he says, I haven't seen such great faith in all of Israel. And all the Israelites are going, hey, we're Israelites. I mean, we're the chosen people. We're the promised people. What, you're saying this Roman centurion's got great faith? Yeah, and on top of that, earlier I said, this Canaanite woman has faith that's megos. That's a total slap in the face to the Israel guys listening, to his disciples. Yeah,
so was it a couple of years after this when Christ went to not Jews, but
to the Gentiles. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. This is our first clue to the fact that the promise of a rescue after our fall to mankind, the promise of this rescue looks like it's going to extend not just to the lost sheep of Israel, but to all the nations, including the Canaanites, the worst people in the entire Old Testament, the Canaanites. The Canaanites. I mean, that's the Canaanites. And here, just when you think, okay, God judges nations based on their ancestry, the Canaanites, then this Canaanite woman comes and she understands who Jesus is better than all of his apostles at the time. She gets it. She's not presuming upon anything. She knows she doesn't deserve it, but she says, if any crumbs can fall, that's the grace. Any of your grace, I'll take that. Because after all, I'm a Canaanite. I don't deserve squat. And by the way, that's where we ought to come to with Jesus as well. In a real sense, we are all Canaanites by ancestry. I mean, we really don't come to him saying, I come from exactly the right breed and stock. I deserve the blessings of the King of the Jews. In fact, false religions many times try and make themselves Jews for the purpose of finding that favor with the Messiah. A lot of false religions dwell an awful lot on what we need to do to become new Jews. Now, if you have a Mormon background, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Patriarchal blessing, you get which tribe you're from. And many people, I've been told, are taught that when you get your tribe of Israel from that patriarchal blessing, your blood actually changes to be Israel blood. There's this presumption that if I can become a Jew somehow, I'll be on the inside with the Messiah. And Jesus right here says, ancestry has nothing to do with it. You can even take the worst ancestry in the entire world. Who? The Canaanites. And they'll get it before you guys who presume upon your ancestry. That's what he's saying right. This is really a super powerful thing. Let me just close it with this, and you can keep talking. What was it that her faith was great in? Two things. She said two things to tell us. She said, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. Very Messiah term. She understood who he was before they even did. She understood he was the Messiah. And number two, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table. That is, I rely on a blessing from you only because of your grace, not because I deserve it. And in faith, when you understand that, you come to Jesus on the right terms, but only in that sense. Who is he? And do you come because you deserve it? No, you come because you really don't deserve it. It's the grace of God. And that's the message of the rescue throughout the entire New Testament. And God uses a Canaanite woman to illustrate it. It's a fulfillment of this from Isaiah 55, and we'll quit with this. God's speaking to Israel, the nation of Israel. He says, I will make an everlasting covenant with you according to the faithful mercy shown to David. That's your king, the progenitor, actually the model of the Messiah. Behold, I've made him a witness to the peoples. That's not Israel. A leader and commander for the peoples. That's not Israel. Behold, you will call a nation, a goyim, that you don't know. And a nation which knows you not will run to you, just like that Canaanite woman did, because of the Lord your God, even the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. And if you want to understand how the rescue works in the Old Testament using Israel, that's it right there. God wanted to use Israel as a way of communicating to the entire world, there is a rescue. There is a rescue. And the nations will run to you saying, tell us about this rescue. The goyim, the non-Jews, will do this. But when you get up to the first century and Jesus comes, the Jews have lost that idea. They see themselves as privileged and with the right blood, and we have the right ancestry, and we have all the right papers, and because of that, we deserve God's blessing. And Jesus had to come and break that up and say, nope. When they came to John the Baptist, the Pharisees came to John the Baptist. Remember that in the early Gospels? The Pharisees come out to John the Baptist. He says, who told you guys to fear the wrath to come? You know? And then he goes on and he says, and if you think the fact that you're sons of Abraham is going to get you anywhere, it's not, because God can turn these stones into the sons of Abraham. Your ancestry has nothing to do with anything. And here we take the worst of all the worst of all the worst peoples of the entire world, the Canaanites. And she gets it. Descendants of Cain, C-A-I-N. Yes, the descendants of Cain. Yeah. The first murder was Cain, yeah. Yeah. So the sons of Cain are probably all gone. Right. Right. Well, no, because most people interpret the son of Cain as being in terms of being a murderer. If you're a murderer, you're like the first murderer, but not necessarily an ancestry of him. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, last question. Yeah, Iran actually comes from Shem, which is where the Jews come from. They are close cousins to the Jews. And yet Iraq comes from another son. So when you see Iran and Iraq have wars, they never got together because they came from two different sons of Noah. So there's connections that go all the way back in these people. And in fact, when you get through parts of the Middle East right now, when you look at Palestine even, there's a mix of people in Palestine from this plotting. You've got not only the sons of Shem, but you've got some Japhethites that are down there, and you also have some Hamites that are down there. It's the one area in the entire map of this geography where all three of them are there fighting each other. And it's in Israel, which is really kind of ironic. That's why all that fighting's been going on, yeah. So we need to wrap this up. But that's really what you need to take away. Canaan was cursed and was the worst of all these geographical distributions of peoples, and yet Jesus decides to deliberately make an example out of this Canaanite woman who understands for the first time that he's the Messiah before the apostles did, and that also salvation comes by grace, not by ancestry or being deserved. And she got it. And in the visual Bible, he spun around and embraced her, and all the other apostles took a couple steps back and said, I don't get it. It would take them a couple more years to finally get it. So if you feel like you come from the wrong ancestry, which we all do, and because of that you don't deserve anything from God, you're right, you deserve nothing from God. But at the moment that you put your trust and faith in the rescuer, Jesus himself, you are made a child of his. And ancestry has nothing to do with it, even if you come from Canaan. Okay, let's pray. Father, what an encouragement this woman is to us. And Lord, what a warning it is to see how you dealt with Canaan, who went so far afield, who did such detestable things. And because of your love for your people in Israel, you had to wipe them out. You had to separate them. Lord, there's many of us that feel like we're nothings and come from nothing and have nothing going for us, like the Canaanite woman. Not only was she Canaanite, but she was a woman, a stranger. And Lord, many times we think we have no basis to come to you in our need. And yet we are exactly in the place you want us to be in our need. Not because we deserve anything from you, not because we've earned anything in our ancestry from you, not because we come to you with any kind of credentials that get us anywhere, but simply in our need, like the woman, we go down on our knees and say, Lord, help me. Help me. And then the words of Joel come to mind where he says, and all those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And that's what you did for us. When we least deserved it and least expected it, there you were, welcoming us into your arms and calling us your children and making us your children when before we were not. And Lord, that's the exciting thing about this rescue. So I pray you'd continue to impress upon our minds and our hearts your tremendous love for us that transcends culture and all respects of our nature, our fallenness. And it goes past that when we just will kneel at your feet and say, help me. And you embrace us and pick us up and you love us. So thank you now. In Jesus' name, amen.